The galaxy was at war. The human race, small and unprepared, was fighting against a vast alien empire. For years, Earth had been under attack, its colonies destroyed one by one. The alien queen, known as Queen Zora, ruled with an iron fist. She was known for her cold, calculating nature and her ability to defeat any enemy that stood in her way. Queen Zora's empire was vast, stretching across many planets. Her warriors were stronger, faster, and more advanced than any force humanity had ever known. The queen was confident in her victory. She believed that humanity's time was over and the empire's control over the galaxy was certain. On the front lines, a human soldier named Jackson stood in the heat of battle. He was young, but his reputation had already spread across the human forces. Jackson wasn't just a soldier, he was a symbol of humanity's will to survive. In every fight, he was at the heart of the action, showing courage and determination even when the odds were against him. Jackson had been raised in a world of war. He had seen his home destroyed in the early stages of the invasion, and since then, he fought with everything he had to protect what little remained of his people. He had learned to fight not just with weapons, but with his mind. Each battle was a puzzle, and Jackson was good at solving them. This day was no different. The human forces had set up a stronghold on a small, barren planet. The alien army was coming to destroy it. As Jackson stood at the front, watching the enemy approach, he knew this battle would be like all the others. The aliens were ruthless, and their technology was far superior to anything humanity could produce. But Jackson had a plan. "Stay sharp," Jackson ordered his comrades. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." The ground shook as the alien army landed. Their ships were massive metallic behemoths that towered over the human positions. The soldiers inside them were as cold as the machines they rode in, soldiers trained to kill without hesitation. Jackson's team stood ready, their weapons aimed at the approaching enemy. Jackson didn't waste time. He ordered his team to open fire. The air filled with the sound of blaster shots, and the ground was torn apart by explosions. The aliens responded quickly, sending wave after wave of soldiers toward the human stronghold. Despite their overwhelming numbers, Jackson's team fought fiercely. They took cover behind rocks and debris, picking off enemy soldiers one by one. Jackson moved through the battlefield with precision, directing his team and making sure no one was left behind. His eyes were always scanning, looking for weaknesses in the alien forces. The battle raged on for hours. Jackson's team was outnumbered, but they held their ground. It wasn't just their weapons that kept them alive, it was their will. Humans had a way of fighting that the aliens didn't understand. They fought not just for survival, but for the future of their people. Jackson's heart raced as he noticed something. The aliens had started to push forward, gaining ground in certain areas. Their heavy artillery was taking out the human defenses one by one. Jackson knew that time was running out. If they didn't do something soon, the entire stronghold would fall. "I need a distraction," Jackson said to his second-in-command, a soldier named Kira. "Get to the south wall and cause a breach. I'll lead the charge from the east." Kira nodded without a word. She knew exactly what needed to be done. As she moved out, Jackson prepared himself for what was to come. He could feel the weight of the battle on his shoulders. If they lost today, it wouldn't just be another defeat, it could be the end of the human resistance. Jackson turned and sprinted toward the eastern flank, his blaster raised. His heart pounded in his chest as he prepared to charge into the heart of the alien forces. He wasn't afraid. Fear was something he had learned to push aside long ago, but even he couldn't deny the odds they were facing. Then, something unexpected happened. The alien forces stopped moving. Jackson stopped in his tracks, his eyes scanning the battlefield. The alien soldiers had halted their advance, and a strange silence settled over the battlefield. For a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. Jackson looked to the sky. That's when he saw it, a massive ship, far larger than the others, appeared above the battlefield. It was different from the others in every way. Its sleek design and dark, shining surface made it appear like a shadow against the sun. The ship hovered above the chaos, and slowly it began to descend. "Fall back!" Jackson shouted to his team. "Get to cover!" His soldiers scattered, seeking shelter as the massive ship landed. The ground shook with its weight. Jackson's heart raced. He knew that this was no ordinary ship. This was a ship that only one person in the galaxy could command, Queen Zora. Jackson had heard of her before. Her name was feared throughout the galaxy. She was ruthless, intelligent, and an unmatched strategist. But what frightened Jackson the most was the fact that she never appeared on the battlefield unless she was sure of victory. Jackson's mind raced. This wasn't just another battle. This was a turning point, and now the Queen herself was about to enter the fray. The alien forces gathered around their queen as she emerged from the ship. Jackson could see her clearly now, standing tall and proud, her presence commanding the attention of every soldier in the area. She was unlike any other alien Jackson had seen. Her regal appearance was matched only by the calm, deadly aura that surrounded her. Jackson took a deep breath. He had faced countless enemies in battle, but this was different. The Queen's reputation alone made her a force to be reckoned with. And yet, as he watched her step onto the battlefield, he noticed something strange. Queen Zora didn't move, like a warrior. She didn't give orders. She simply stood there, her eyes scanning the human soldiers. And when her gaze landed on Jackson, she froze. Her eyes widened in shock. Jackson didn't know why, but the sight of her stunned reaction sent a shiver down his spine. For the first time in the battle, Jackson felt a deep unease. He didn't know what it meant, but something was about to change. The battlefield had fallen silent. The clash of weapons and the rumble of explosions were replaced by an eerie stillness. Jackson's heart pounded in his chest as he stood motionless, staring at Queen Zora. His mind was racing, trying to understand what had just happened. Why had she stopped? Why was she looking at him like that? Jackson had fought in countless battles, but nothing like this. He had faced enemies more powerful, more advanced. But the moment their eyes met, he felt a deep unease, a strange connection he couldn't explain. The alien queen didn't move. She just stood there, gazing at him with a look of disbelief. Her soldiers, the fiercest warriors in the galaxy, seemed just as confused, watching their queen in silence. Jackson's team had taken cover, their weapons aimed at the queen's soldiers, but none of them dared to fire. They were all watching her, unsure of what to do next. The situation had shifted in a way no one had expected. Finally, Queen Zora spoke. Her voice was calm and cold, like the stillness before a storm. "Jackson." Her voice echoed across the battlefield, carrying an unusual weight. The name seemed to hang in the air, charged with meaning. "Is it really you?" Jackson's throat went dry. How did she know his name? He had never encountered the Queen before, at least not directly. He had heard stories of her ruthlessness, her power, but never anything that suggested she knew anything about him personally. Yet here she was, calling his name as if it were a secret only she understood. "Who are you?" Jackson asked, his voice steady despite the growing unease inside him. He was a soldier, trained to face danger head-on. But this felt different. There was something about the Queen that made the air itself feel heavy. For a long moment, Queen Zora didn't answer. She simply stared at him, her eyes searching his face as if she were seeing something no one else could. Then, without warning, she raised her hand, signaling her soldiers to lower their weapons. The alien soldiers hesitated but obeyed. Jackson's soldiers did the same, keeping their weapons aimed but not firing. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut through. "What are you doing?" one of Jackson's men whispered. He was as confused as the rest of them. "I don't know," Jackson replied, his eyes still locked on the Queen. "But stay alert." Queen Zora took a slow step forward, her regal presence commanding the attention of every soldier in the area. Her movements were deliberate, each step calculated. As she drew closer, Jackson could see the details of her face more clearly. She was beautiful in a way that was almost unsettling, with features sharp and otherworldly. Yet it was the sadness in her eyes that struck Jackson the most. He hadn't expected to see that in the eyes of a conqueror. "What do you want?" Jackson asked, his voice firm despite the confusion swirling inside him. Zora stopped just a few feet in front of him, close enough for Jackson to feel the weight of her presence. She stood tall, looking down at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she exhaled slowly, her breath a soft sigh of resignation. "I want to know why." Her words were simple but heavy. "Why do you keep fighting? Why do you continue to resist even when it seems hopeless?" Jackson blinked, taken aback by her question. He had expected a demand for surrender, a threat of annihilation, but not this. "Because it's who we are," Jackson answered, his voice steady. "We fight because we have to. Because we're human." Zora's eyes narrowed, as if she were studying him more closely. Human. She repeated the word as though it were something she hadn't truly understood before. "I've never understood your kind. You are weak, you are outmatched, yet you never stop fighting. Even when victory seems impossible, you push forward." Jackson didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth of his words hung in the air. Between them, it was a truth that every human soldier understood. Humanity had always fought for survival, not just against the odds, but against extinction itself. It was in their blood, in their hearts. Zora looked past him, her gaze drifting over the battlefield. Her eyes softened for a brief moment, and Jackson saw the weight of centuries in her expression. It was as if she were no longer looking at him, but at something far in the past. "Tell me," Zora said, her voice quieter now, almost distant. "What makes you different from the others?" Jackson felt a chill run down his spine at the question. He had never seen the Queen like this before. This wasn't the ruthless leader he had heard about, the conqueror who destroyed entire worlds without a second thought. This was something else, something human. "I don't know," Jackson answered honestly. "Maybe it's because we believe in something more than just survival. Maybe it's because we believe that there's something worth saving." Zora didn't reply right away. She looked at him for a long time, and Jackson could almost feel the weight of her thoughts pressing down on him. The silence stretched on until it became unbearable. Finally, Zora spoke, her voice low and filled with an emotion Jackson couldn't place. "I once believed that strength was all that mattered. That power was everything. But now—" She paused as if searching for the right words. "Now, I wonder if we've been wrong all along." Jackson felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Was the Queen really questioning her own empire? Was she second-guessing the very foundation of her rule? "I don't know what you're trying to say," Jackson said carefully. "But if you're looking for peace, we can find a way. The war doesn't have to keep going." Zora looked at him again, her gaze intense. "Peace?" she echoed. "How do you propose we make peace, human? After everything that has been done?" Jackson hesitated. The weight of the situation pressed on him. He knew it wasn't just about finding a way to end the war. It was about understanding what had brought them to this point. For the first time in a long while, he felt the heavy responsibility of being the person who could possibly change the course of history. He took a step forward, his voice steady. "We start by talking, and we listen." Zora's eyes flickered with something like hope, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in centuries. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. For the first time, Queen Zora wasn't the ruthless conqueror. She was a leader who had reached a crossroads, and Jackson was the one who had brought her here. The silence that followed Jackson's words was almost deafening. Queen Zora stood still, her sharp eyes never leaving him. It was as if time had slowed down, the battlefield forgotten for a moment as she processed everything he had said. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to be like the other humans she had encountered before, fearless but always desperate, fighting only for survival. No, Jackson was different. He spoke of peace, of understanding. She didn't know why, but his words were stirring something deep within her, something she had buried long ago. Zora's mind raced back to her past, to a time when she was not a queen, not a conqueror, but a young leader, learning the art of war and leadership. A time when her people believed that power was the only thing that mattered. She had embraced that belief fully, crushing anyone who stood in her way without mercy. But now, facing Jackson, she couldn't help but wonder if everything she had known was wrong. As Jackson stood before her, waiting for a response, he saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. This was not the cold, unyielding leader he had imagined. This was someone who was grappling with more than just the weight of war. She was struggling with something deeper, something personal. Zora's hand twitched slightly, and she took a deep breath, as though steeling herself for something she had never anticipated. "Tell me, Jackson," she said slowly, her voice low but firm. "Why do you fight? Why do you continue to resist, even when it seems like you cannot win?" Jackson didn't hesitate. "Because we have to," he answered simply. "Because we're human. We fight for each other, for what we believe in. We don't give up even when it seems hopeless." Zora's gaze softened for a moment. She had heard such words from her own people many times, but they had always felt hollow to her, just empty slogans to keep the soldiers fighting. But Jackson, there was something about him, something in his eyes, that made her question everything. His words were not just a soldier's words. They were the words of someone who believed in something bigger than himself. "I don't understand," Zora whispered, more to herself than to Jackson. "How can you believe in something when everything around you is falling apart?" Jackson met her gaze with quiet determination. "Because we believe that even in the darkest times, there's still something worth fighting for. We believe in hope, even when the universe tries to take it away from us." Zora's heart clenched at his words. She had never considered hope in such a way. Her people had lost hope long ago, turning to power as a way to fill the emptiness left by their lost ideals. But Jackson's words made her wonder. Had she been wrong all along? Had she sacrificed everything for a vision of strength that had left her empty inside? "Jackson," Zora said, her voice breaking the silence once again. "You are different from the others. You are not like the soldiers I have fought. You are not driven by fear or anger. You are driven by something else, something more." Jackson didn't know what to say. He had never expected to hear such words from an alien queen, especially not the one who had caused so much destruction to his people. But there was something in her voice, in the way she looked at him, that made him realize that she wasn't just speaking about him. She was speaking about herself, too. "I don't know what it is that makes us different," Jackson said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "But I do know that we can change things. We can stop this war. But it has to start with you." Zora was silent for a long moment. Her mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts and emotions. She had lived her entire life in pursuit of power, believing that it was the only way to survive, the only way to keep her people safe. But now, standing in front of this human soldier, she began to question everything she had ever known. "Dao, you know why I know your name, Jackson?" Zora finally asked, her voice tinged with something like sadness. Jackson's brow furrowed. "I don't understand." Zora closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When she spoke again, her voice was almost a whisper, filled with the weight of a past she had long since buried. "It is because of your grandfather. His name was Alexander. He was the first human to defeat me in battle." Jackson's eyes widened in shock. He had heard the stories. His grandfather, Alexander, had been a legend, a hero who had fought against overwhelming odds and defeated enemies that seemed invincible. But to hear that his grandfather had once faced Queen Zora herself, it was something Jackson had never imagined. "You know my grandfather?" Jackson asked, his voice thick with disbelief. Zora nodded slowly, her gaze distant as she recalled the battle that had changed the course of history. "It was many years ago. We were fighting for control of a planet, and your grandfather led a small band of humans to push back my forces. He was clever, resourceful, and relentless. I had never faced an opponent like him before. He defeated me on that battlefield, and it was a humiliation I could never forget." Jackson's heart raced. He had always known that his grandfather was a hero, but to hear the Queen speak of him with such reverence was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. His grandfather had done the impossible. He had defeated the alien Queen herself. "I didn't know," Jackson whispered. "I had no idea." Zora's gaze softened as she looked at him. "Your grandfather's victory marked the beginning of a new era for humanity. It was because of him that I began to question everything I had known. I realized that my empire's strength was not enough to crush the human spirit. I began to see that there was more to life than just power." Jackson was silent, taking in the weight of her words. His grandfather's victory had done more than change the course of history. It had changed Queen Zora herself. The queen, who had once believed in the superiority of her empire, had begun to question the very foundation of her rule. Zora's eyes met Jackson's once more, and for the first time, Jackson saw something in her eyes that wasn't just cold. Calculation. It was uncertainty. "I have lived for centuries, Jackson," Zora said quietly. "I have conquered worlds, destroyed civilizations, and ruled with an iron fist. But now, standing before you, I wonder if I have been wrong all along. If there is another way..." Jackson's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The moment that could change everything. "There is another way," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "But it starts with you. It starts with understanding that we don't have to keep fighting. We can find peace together." Zora looked at him for a long time, as though weighing his words. Finally, she nodded slowly. Perhaps there is hope after all." The tension on the battlefield had changed. The once loud, chaotic sounds of war were now replaced by the quiet, almost surreal silence between Jackson and Queen Zora. Around them, the battlefield remained still, like the calm after a storm. The soldiers of both sides stood in uneasy formation, waiting for their leaders to make the next move. Jackson had never imagined he would be standing here, face to face with the Queen of the alien empire. He had been trained for combat, for strategy, but this moment, this encounter, was unlike anything he had ever prepared for. Zora's gaze remained fixed on him, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and something more. He couldn't place it, but it was there, something in her eyes that hinted at the turmoil inside her. Zora looked around at her soldiers who had lowered their weapons at her command. The alien warriors, normally fierce and relentless, now stood motionless, uncertain. They were waiting for their queen to speak, for her to make the decision that would determine the fate of this battle, of their people, and of the humans who had resisted them for so long. Jackson could feel the weight of their stares on him, the eyes of warriors who had never known defeat. And yet, in this moment, he could see something different in them. Fear? No. It was something more like hesitation, uncertainty about their leader's next command. Zora had changed the dynamics of this war with a single word. The Queen's voice broke the silence, low and commanding. "Jackson, you have faced us without fear, without hesitation. You have fought for your people, even when it seemed hopeless. I cannot ignore that. Jackson stood tall, trying to keep his composure. The words she spoke were unexpected. He had always seen Zora as the embodiment of strength, as the unstoppable force that had crushed so many worlds. But here she was, speaking of hesitation, of doubt. "I've fought for my people because it's the right thing to do," Jackson said, his voice steady. "Because we believe in something bigger than just surviving. We believe in a future, one where we can live in peace, not in constant war." Zora looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Do you truly believe that peace is possible between our peoples?" she asked, her voice filled with something Jackson couldn't fully grasp. Was it skepticism? Hope? Regret? "I do," Jackson replied without hesitation. "It has to be possible. We can't keep fighting forever. We'll both destroy each other if we do." Zora was silent for a moment, and Jackson could see the weight of centuries of conflict in her eyes. She had led her people in wars for as long as she could remember. For her, power and strength had always been the ultimate goal. But now, standing here with Jackson, she began to question everything. Could peace really be possible? "I have seen my people suffer," Zora said quietly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "We have been at war for so long that I don't know if we can stop. What is left when the fighting ends? What do we have left to live for?" Jackson's heart ached for her, for the alien queen who had been so consumed by her empire's thirst for power that she had forgotten what it meant to live. He had always believed that the strength of a people came from their unity, from their willingness to stand together for something greater than themselves. But Zora's people had been divided by war for too long. "Maybe that's the problem," Jackson said softly. "You've been so focused on power that you've forgotten what it means to have peace, to live without constant fear, without constant fighting. You don't have to lose everything to gain something more." Zora's eyes narrowed as she processed his words. She had heard this idea before, from diplomats and peacekeepers, but never from a soldier, never from someone who had faced the full force of her empire and lived to tell the tale. Jackson's words stirred something deep within her. "Could it really be that simple? You want me to surrender everything?" Zora asked, her voice cold again, but there was an underlying tremor in her words. "To throw away my empire? To throw away the power I've built for centuries?" Jackson shook his head slowly. "I'm not asking you to give up your strength, Zora. I'm asking you to use it for something better. You've built an empire on fear and destruction, but you don't have to destroy everything to show your power. True strength comes from choosing peace over war." For a long moment, Zora said nothing. She simply stood there, staring at Jackson as if trying to read him, to understand him. It was as if she were seeing him for the first time, not as an enemy, but as a human being. She had heard many things about humanity, about their will to survive, their stubbornness in the face of overwhelming odds. But Jackson was different. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a voice of reason, a beacon of hope in a world of destruction. Finally, Zora spoke, her voice softer than it had been before. "You ask for peace, but you do not understand the price of it. To end this war, we must let go of everything we have fought for. The loss of that power would be unimaginable." Jackson nodded slowly, understanding the depth of what she was saying. He knew the sacrifices peace would require. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But he also knew that the alternative was worse. The destruction of both their peoples, an endless cycle of violence and pain. "I understand," Jackson said quietly. "But I believe it's worth the sacrifice. We've already lost so much, both sides. What's left is the chance to rebuild, to create something new. I believe we can do that together." Zora's eyes searched his face, as if trying to find the lie in his words. But there was no lie. There was only truth. Truth that she hadn't allowed herself to see until now. "I don't know if I can change everything, Jackson," Zora said finally, her voice filled with uncertainty. But I will try. I will try to find another way. Jackson's heart surged with a quiet hope. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. A beginning of something that could change the course of the war, and perhaps the future of both their peoples. Zora looked over her shoulder at her soldiers, who stood in silence, waiting for their queen's command. The war had stopped for now, but the path forward was unclear. Yet for the first time in a long time, Zora felt something she hadn't felt in years, the possibility of peace. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the battlefield. The quiet that had settled over the war zone was unnerving. For the first time in what seemed like forever, there was no sound of weapons clashing, no explosions, shaking the ground. The fighting had stopped, but the tension in the air was thick. Jackson stood next to Queen Zora, both of them looking out over the remains of the battle. The bodies of fallen soldiers from both sides were scattered across the field, evidence of the brutal conflict that had taken place. But now, there was no sign of battle. The soldiers, once ready for war, stood silent, waiting for orders, unsure of what to do next. Zora turned her gaze toward her army, her expression unreadable. Her mind was swirling with conflicting thoughts. She had always been sure of herself, sure of her power, sure of her empire. But now, with the human soldier standing by her side, offering peace instead of destruction, everything seemed uncertain. Could peace truly be possible between their peoples? Could she let go of the empire she had built, the empire that had defined her for centuries? "I've never had to make a choice like this before," Zora said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything I've ever known has been built on strength, on power, on winning. But now—" She paused, looking at Jackson with a mixture of confusion and wonder. "Now, I have to decide if it's worth it. If there's something worth saving." Jackson turned to face her, his eyes full of understanding. He had fought for so long, for so many years, not just to survive, but to protect the future of his people. He knew the cost of war, the cost of fighting for survival. He knew what it felt like to lose everything. And now, he could see the same. Doubt in Zora's eyes that he had seen in his own reflection at times during the war. "Peace is never easy," Jackson said softly, his voice steady. "It means letting go of everything you've built, but it also means building something new, something better, something worth fighting for, without destroying everything in the process." Zora's eyes softened as she listened to him. She had seen humans fight for their lives, but she had never truly understood the depth of their desire for peace. To her, peace had always seemed like a weakness, something that could only be obtained through power and dominance. But Jackson's words stirred something within her, something that had been buried under centuries of war and bloodshed. The queen turned away, looking out at the distant stars. Her mind was racing. The weight of her past, the weight of her people's expectations, pressed heavily on her shoulders. How could she walk away from everything she had known? How could she tell her people that their strength, their empire, was not the key to survival? "Do you truly believe that we can start over?" Zora asked, her voice trembling slightly. "That we can build something from the ashes of all this destruction? That there's still hope for us?" Jackson stepped closer to her, his expression softening. "I believe in you, Zora. I believe in the possibility of change, but it has to start with us, here, right now. We can't keep living in the past. The war has taken too much from both of us. We've lost too many lives, and for what? A future of endless fighting?" Zora closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words wash over her. She had spent so many years fighting, so many years believing that the only way to protect her people was through war. But now, standing beside Jackson, she realized that there had to be another way. A way that didn't involve constant destruction. A way that didn't require more lives to be lost. "You're right," she said, her voice barely audible. "I've spent so much of my life believing that power is everything, that strength is the key to survival. But now I'm not so sure." She turned back to Jackson, her eyes filled with a mixture of uncertainty and resolve. "But if we do this, if we choose peace, there will be no going back. There will be no more empire, no more war. We will be starting from nothing, and I will have to trust you, and trust humanity." Jackson nodded. He knew the gravity of what she was saying. The path to peace wasn't easy. It was full of sacrifices and challenges. But it was the only way forward. "We'll help you rebuild," Jackson said, his voice firm. "We'll fight for peace, just like we fought for survival. We'll build a new future, together." Zora studied him for a long time, her gaze intense. Finally, she let out a deep breath, as if releasing years of burden that had weighed her down. "Then we will begin," she said, her voice filled with a newfound determination. "But this is not just about me or you. It's about all of us, our people, our worlds. We will have to convince my people that this is the right choice. They will not be easy to convince. They have known only war." "I know," Jackson replied, "but we can do it. Together." Zora looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt, but she found none. There was no hesitation in his eyes, no fear. There was only hope, and a quiet strength that reminded her of everything she had lost, and everything she could still gain. "The first step," Zora said, "is to stop the war completely, to make sure both sides lay down their arms, but that will take time, and it will take trust. And trust, I know, is not something easily earned." Jackson nodded. "We'll work for it. We'll start small with the soldiers, one step at a time." Zora turned to face her soldiers, who were still waiting, their faces a mixture of confusion and curiosity. She could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They had followed her for so long, but now, after everything that had happened, they were unsure of what to do next. Zora could no longer lead them with the same force and certainty she once had. It was time for something new, something that didn't rely on fear and power. "I will speak to them," Zora said, her voice steady now. "I will tell them the truth. The war is over." She took a deep breath and walked toward her army, Jackson following close behind. The soldiers parted as they approached, their eyes filled with suspicion. But Zora did not stop. She walked forward, her gaze firm. "For the first time in centuries," Zora began, her voice echoing across the silent battlefield, "I stand before you, not as your queen, but as a leader who seeks something more. I seek peace, and I ask you, all of you, to stand with me, to help me build a future where we do not fight, but live." The soldiers were silent, watching her carefully. Zora could feel their eyes on her, but she did not flinch. She had made her choice. Now, she would lead them down a new path.